The Siege of Amida, 359 Anno Domini. Persia shatters Rome's invincible legend. People used to say that Roman walls could not be taken down. They said no foreign army had what it took to starve a Roman city into giving up. But in the summer of 359 AD, a Persian king rode up to the gates of Amida and made up his mind to prove every one of those people wrong. This wasn't going to be the kind of fight that ends in one afternoon. It wasn't going to come down to bravery alone. This was going to be a contest of patience, fire, and time. And by the time the first stone was hurled from the first machine, both empires would learn something they hadn't expected. Even the thickest walls on earth can come down, if the person on the other side is willing to wait long enough. By the middle of the 4th century AD, Rome was starting to feel less sure about its future in the East. For generations, the empire had lived by a simple idea. Strong borders meant lasting peace. Walls, forts, and well-trained soldiers were supposed to keep trouble far from home. But the eastern frontier wasn't behaving the way it used to. Just across that border sat the Sassanian Empire of Persia, a rival Rome couldn't bully or easily beat. This wasn't some loose collection of tribes that would scatter after one hard fight. It was a real empire with money, organized armies, and centuries of experience. Rome and Persia had been at war for decades, fighting again and again over Mesopotamia. Flat, open land that neither side fully owned but both desperately wanted. Trade routes cut through the middle of it. Any weakness there could become a disaster overnight. To guard against that risk, Rome built fortified cities along the frontier. Cities like Amida. Amida wasn't the biggest or richest city Rome had, but it sat in exactly the right or wrong place, depending on which side of the border you were on. The city stood directly on one of the main roads leading into Roman-controlled Syria and Anatolia. If an enemy took Amida, the road west swung wide open. If Amida held its ground, that road stayed blocked. For Rome, Amida was a padlock on the eastern door. Roman engineers knew what they had in Amida and didn't take it for granted. They kept building it up year after year. The walls were thick and tall, made from dark basalt stone that doesn't crack easily. The towers were spaced tightly so defenders could cover every angle of attack. The whole place was built to absorb punishment and stay standing. Not to look scary, to survive. Roman commanders liked that. Their strategy was simple. If war came, stay behind the walls and let the enemy exhaust himself trying to break through. On the Persian side, patience had been wearing thin for a long time. Shapur II, the king of the Sassanian Empire, had spent most of his reign fighting Rome. He didn't think Rome was weak, but he no longer believed it was unstoppable. What he saw was a border that had crept deep into territory Persia considered its own. Roman forts and cities stood in places where Persian authority once went unchallenged. To Shapur, that wasn't defense. That was occupation. Year after year, the situation stayed the same. Talks went nowhere. Small clashes solved nothing. Eventually, Shapur reached a conclusion. As long as Rome believed its eastern cities were untouchable, it would never budge. So the walls had to come down. The decision wasn't sudden. It was deliberate and worked out carefully over time. Shapur wasn't thinking about a quick raid. He was thinking about a statement, something big enough that Rome couldn't ignore. Instead of chasing Roman armies in open fields, he decided to go after Roman confidence itself. And that confidence lived inside fortified cities like Amida. Preparation became everything. Shapur built an army specifically designed for siege warfare, not just infantry and cavalry, but specialists. Engineers who could build towers and ramps, sappers trained to dig under walls and collapse foundations, archers who could keep defenders pinned without pause. Huge stockpiles of supplies were assembled and checked long before the march began. This army wasn't built for speed. It was built to sit in one place for however long it took. By spring of 359 AD, everything was ready. The order went out. Persian banners rose. Columns formed up. The army began moving west toward the Roman border. Far ahead, the walls of Amida stood quiet under the sun. The city had no idea that the decision to destroy it had already been made. The first warning didn't come with noise or fire. It came with dust. Roman lookouts on the walls spotted it rising on the horizon, thin and brown at first, then thicker, then spreading wide. Something very large was coming their way. Inside the city, The word spread faster than any messenger could carry it. Soldiers moved to their posts. Civilians grabbed what they could and pushed deeper into the city. The gates swung shut. Men filled the watchtowers. Amida was doing exactly what it had been built to do. From the Roman perspective, this situation wasn't new. They had dealt with sieges before and understood how the script went. The enemy shows up. The enemy tests the walls. The enemy fails. Time does the rest. But as the Persian force drew closer, something felt different. No wild charges, no frantic rushes toward the gates. The Persian columns moved at an even, measured pace. Units held their formations. Supply wagons rolled steadily behind. Everything said careful planning, not urgency. When the full army came into view, the scale of it hit hard. This wasn't a raiding party. This wasn't a show of force. This was an army that had come to stay. From the walls, Roman defenders could see siege equipment being unloaded. Timber, tools, and materials clearly prepared far in advance. The message was impossible to misread. This army hadn't come to threaten Amida. It had come to take it apart, piece by piece. Shapur II didn't rush toward the walls. He chose his ground carefully. The Persian camp went up in neat rows, just far enough back to stay out of arrow range. Defensive works rose almost immediately around the perimeter. The Persians weren't just attacking a city. They were building a temporary one right outside it. For the Roman defenders, that was deeply unsettling. A wild charge was something you could fight. A careless enemy could be punished for his mistakes. But cold, disciplined patience was a much harder thing to combat. Days went by. No major attack came. Instead, the Persians watched. They studied the walls and measured distances. They worked out the angles defenders could fire from. Inside Amida, pressure built without a single serious blow being struck. Arrows flew now and then, not to kill, but to test and learn. Roman commanders slowly understood what kind of contest this actually was. Not one of courage, but of endurance. Supplies were counted. Water sources were locked down. Rations got tighter. The city was solid but packed with people, and every extra mouth meant the clock ticked a little faster. Outside the walls, Shapur waited. He hadn't come to rush fate. He had come to control it. As the sun dropped behind the Persian camp each evening, both sides arrived at the same quiet understanding. This wasn't about whether Amida would be attacked. The attack had already started. It was simply building toward its moment. That moment came when Shapur decided stillness had done enough of its work. Before sunrise, Persian engineers moved toward the walls, not running, but walking in tight formation behind raised shields, moving exactly as planned. Siege engines rolled behind them, heavy and slow. The first real blows landed just after dawn. Battering rams hammered the lower sections of the wall again and again, the impact echoing through every street inside the city. Inside Amida, horns screamed. Soldiers poured to their positions. Archers climbed the towers. Engine crews readied their weapons as dust sifted down from the shaking stone. The Romans hit back hard. Ballista bolts tore into Persian machines. Rocks were hurled down onto the men below. Burning pitch was poured on anyone who got too close. For a time, the defense held. But the Persians weren't chasing a quick win. They were studying the fight as it happened. As the battle continued, Persian engineers stopped hammering everything at once and concentrated on specific sections. Older towers, spots with softer ground beneath, places where the foundation was uneven. One tower started taking more punishment than the rest. Each impact chipped away at it. Hairline cracks appeared and spread. By the time the Roman defenders understood what was happening, it was already too late. With a grinding sound, part of the tower gave way and fell inward. Stone crashed down. Men were buried in the rubble. Dust and smoke swallowed the air. A breach had opened in the wall. The Persians were moving before the dust settled. Infantry came forward at a run, shields up, pushing into the gap. Archers fired over their heads at anything that moved inside the breach. Roman soldiers sprinted to plug the hole, forming up shield to shield in the narrow opening, fighting in smoke and debris with whatever they had. Swords clashed, spears broke, blood ran across the stone. It was brutal and confused, but it wasn't too random. This was a planned breakthrough. As the day wore on, exhaustion started doing the Persians' work for them. Roman soldiers had been awake for days. Fires burned inside the city. Supplies were vanishing faster than anyone had planned. And a terrible realization spread through the defenders. The Persians were learning from every exchange. Every Roman response showed how the city's defenses were set up. Every small success told the attackers how to push harder. By nightfall, the breach hadn't been sealed. The walls were no longer whole. The siege had entered a new and darker phase, one where time was working against Rome. After the breach, the Persians changed their approach. They understood that breaking through the stone was only half the job. Breaking the people inside was the real goal. So they went underground. Persian engineers started tunneling toward the base of Amida's walls, working in shifts around the clock, cutting through earth and rock with quiet discipline. Fires were lit inside the tunnels to weaken supports. Timber soaked in oil was packed in and set ablaze. The plan was straightforward: bring the walls down from below. Inside the city, Roman commanders figured out what was happening when the ground started making sounds it shouldn't. Small cracks appeared in the streets near the walls. Towers trembled without warning. The enemy was no longer just outside. He was underneath it. Roman soldiers dug counter-tunnels, racing to intercept the Persian miners. Underground battles were fought in darkness and choking smoke, men swinging blades in spaces too tight to move, with tunnels sometimes collapsing on fighters from both sides. Above ground, the pressure never stopped. Persian machines kept firing without pause. Arrows fell day and night. Stones pounded towers already weakened by fire and vibration from below. Inside Amida, conditions collapsed rapidly. Fires burned unchecked. Smoke thickened the air. Water became harder to protect. Disease followed. The dead piled up faster than they could be buried. Wounded men crowded makeshift shelters. Fear moved through the city faster than any blade. And still the Persians didn't rush. They let Amida exhaust itself. Roman discipline frayed. Some defenders talked about falling back. Others prayed for a relief army that never came. The walls were cracked and leaning. Each new explosion from below sent fresh panic through the streets. The truth was impossible to deny. Amida was being destroyed from the inside out. What had started as a siege of stone had become a siege of time, fear, and endurance. And time no longer belonged to Rome. When the final assault came, Amida was already a broken city. The walls had failed. The towers leaned. The defenders were running on fear, not strength. Shapur II saw this clearly and didn't hurry. He only needed to pick his moment. That moment arrived after another underground collapse. A section of wall near the earlier breach gave out completely, stone tumbling in both directions, leaving a gap no one had the strength left to seal. Dust filled the air. Voices screamed through the streets. The Persians were already moving. Siege towers rolled forward. Ladders went up. Infantry surged toward the opening in organized waves. There was no hesitation. Roman soldiers ran to defend the breach. But there weren't enough of them, and those who arrived were battered and slow. They fought anyway, hand to hand, shield against shield, giving ground step by step. But the numbers made the ending inevitable. Persian troops flooded into the city. Archers fired into the streets. Cavalry waited outside, ready to push through once there was room. The Roman defense broke apart in sections. Some units fell back toward the city center. Others were surrounded and cut down where they stood. Command collapsed. Officers couldn't be heard over the noise. The city fragmented into desperate pockets of men fighting alone without coordination. Then came the worst of it. Once inside, the Persians showed no mercy. The sack of Amida was savage and uncontrolled. Soldiers and civilians died side by side. Fire jumped from house to house. Screams replaced the sounds of a city that had once been orderly and safe. Ammianus Marcellinus survived by hiding among the dead. Most others were not so fortunate. By nightfall, it was over. Amida had fallen. For Shapur II, the victory was complete, but it had cost him enormously. Persian casualties were heavy. Those walls had demanded blood before they gave way. But the message was unmistakable. Rome's eastern defenses were not invincible. A city generations had called unbreakable had been brought down by patience, engineering, and relentless pressure. The war wasn't over, but the balance had shifted in a way that couldn't be undone. Amida didn't disappear quietly into the past. Its walls were shattered, its defenders were scattered, its people were taken into captivity. But the scars the siege left behind ran far deeper than the physical ruins. For the Roman Empire, Amida was a warning that couldn't be ignored. It proved in clear terms that Roman fortifications in the east had real limits. Stone walls and disciplined legions were no longer enough against a patient enemy who understood engineering and knew how to use fear as a weapon. Roman commanders studied Amida for years afterward. They reinforced eastern cities, they strengthened supply lines, They accepted the painful truth that the Persians were no longer just rivals to be managed. They were equals. For the Sassanian Empire, Amida was proof that Persian engineering could match Roman ingenuity, that coordination and relentless pressure could break even the strongest Roman city. Shapur II didn't celebrate loudly. He understood what the victory had cost. Thousands of his men had died in the dirt beneath those walls. But what had been demonstrated was worth the price. Rome could be made to bleed. Amida became something larger than the city it had been. It became a symbol of a new kind of warfare. The kind where endurance matters more than speed, where preparation matters more than glory, where victory goes not to the fastest army, but to the one willing to outlast everyone else. Long after the fires burned out, long after the banners were lowered, the name Amida remained. A reminder that great empires dawn to collapse in a single dramatic moment. They weaken, one siege at a time.